Is it up yet? Wonder if everyone else has it. Whether it's up or not. Alrighty, so looks like we are live. Hello everyone, welcome to a tutorial on Blender. Thanks to a few friends, they gave me an idea to kind of start a tutorial animation, and I've just been talking around, and I just know a lot of people that are kind of interested in it. So I am posting up this video for those people that are interested, and I will often be doing these. I plan to make it a very good... So I can close my door here because I got a dog. But I plan to make this a little series thing. And by the way, I am assuming that you're smart enough to download Blender. I mean, let's be honest. When I watch Blender, a pet peeve, Blender tutorials, a pet peeve of mine is they'd either go really slow, I couldn't hear them clearly, or they wouldn't talk at all, and they'd put just words on the screen, and that drove me nuts because I couldn't work along with them. However, I'm not going to be putting like my working files on up when I start doing advanced stuff. I'll just expect you to kind of be working with me from there. So that's kind of how it works. That's kind of how I plan on doing this. So when you first boot up Blender, this is what you got. And the only difference is I have, the way Blender works is you can kind of set it so it boots up in a default. As far as I remember, the only difference is I have this extra tab called texture editing, which you can add and you can save in file. So let's just go over what we're looking at here. So this is our 3D view, and right now I'm clicking the middle mouse button or the scroll wheel to move around this 3D view. Oh, you also spawn with a cube generally. I don't. I changed that in my default settings. But you spawn with a cube here, little light, and this is your camera. And we'll get into that more later. But this is what you come in with. And I'm right-clicking to select these, by the way. So let's just stick with the left side. So we have our tools. We have translate, rotate, scale. So translate, I'm just going to make a cube here. I'm going to press space. That'll bring up a little bar here where you can literally just search anything. If you're ever in doubt, press space, search it, or search keywords for it, and Blender's smart enough to put it up. Like if you search chamfer, it doesn't know what that is. But if you search fillet, it doesn't know what that is either. But if you search bevel, which I don't have anything selected, but I'm going to show you. So I'm going to search add cube. So you can see I got a cube here. So I have translate, which is basically you can move it around. And then I have rotate, which you can rotate it around. And this is really hard to do manually by doing this because it rotates based on your view. And then you have scale, which easy. And that's kind of how you begin it. But it's pretty hard to use these things. I don't know a lot of people that use these. And there's mirror, I haven't worked with that. Duplicate, work with that. Duplicate linked, haven't really worked with that. Delete, obvious. Join, haven't worked with that. Set origin. Now this, or origin, depending on how you want to answer it. So this is moved by this. So you rotate it according to the origin. See that little dot right there? That's the origin of any object. That's the center of mass. That's whatever you want to call it. Now you can move it by going into edit mode. So with any object, I'm just going to kill this and add another cube here so it's centered. So with any object, you have object mode, you have edit mode right here down in the bottom left, and then you have sculpt, vertex paint, weight paint, texture paint. I don't use these much. I just use edit mode and object mode as far as I know. And I'm just going to press tab, and this will bring you into this view. So what we have is we have these vertices that we can move around at our discretion and kind of see how things work. Problem is, if I do something like this, it's gonna kind of do that, but that makes it harder on the computer to render this because it still thinks this is a flat face. So the best way to remedy it is we select all of them, and by the way, we can select the vertices, edges, or faces. So right here I'm clicking faces, clicking edges, and I usually stick with faces. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subdivide it. I want to go down to subdivide, and then boom, it does that. Now, if we do this, you see it's very different from the whole thing. It's very unique. You can move these different ways. You can make limitless shapes, literally just by subdividing and going about it manually, which is a very slow way to do it, but you can literally make anything with this. It's very slow to do it, though, is to move every single little vertice around there. So let's talk more about what we're looking at all around here. So this is kind of like this I always keep up. It's kind of like your tools. You can create things from it. I'm going to get out of object mode by pushing tab, and you can create things. You got relations, which is kind of like how is like with your groups and such. You got animation. This is where you insert keyframes. I'll cover that later. And then we have motion paths, actions, physics. Not even going to touch. I've never even touched in this, only a little, and it hurts. Grease pencil. I haven't touched it a lot. I'm not going to go over much. And then this is called Manuel Bastiani Labs, and this is an add-on that I actually have. Basically, it creates humans for me, like for my intro, which I'll probably put up somehow. Let me see if I can go grab that real quick. Oops,ception. Let's moreception. So hope you guys don't mind my unprofessionality of showing my desktop. But as you can see, I do a lot. I'm rather organized. Okay, no. I like to think I'm rather organized. So I'm going to go finished, and boom. So no sound, but this is Manuel Bastiani, as I showed you, and this is kind of what I've been working on. This is a 40-hour render, believe it or not. But you know what? I think it turned out pretty well. I need to put some sound to it, but it looks cool. I'm glad what I did there. So yeah, that's my intro. That's going to be my new intro. I'll probably put some sound or music to it. I'm very unsure. Oh yeah, I totally forgot. You guys can only see my Blender screen. Oh, maybe I'll put up a separate video, or yeah, I don't want to deal with this right now, so I'll put up a different video. So you guys won't have to, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But anyway, back to here. This is kind of like your toolbar. And then down here, you get extra options for certain advanced things you're doing. Down here is your timeline. Now, this won't do anything. As you can tell, I'm scrubbing it. But this is used a lot in animation. And this is where you insert your keyframes. Say, like, I'm just giving you an animation basic right here. Let's say, so it starts at 0. This is the beginning of the film. So I'm just going to press I. And this is inserting a keyframe at frame 0. So I'm going to say, hey, I want this to be right here by setting a keyframe in location at frame 0. Now if I go over to frame 30, I say, okay, I want this to be right here during frame 30. Now if you see as I scrub through, it is now animated. And you can fool around with that a little more. You can change its location, its rotation, and its scaling. I don't know all of this yet. That's more advanced. But you can do a lot with these three. So let's say you made a mistake. Say you went up here, and you're like, hey, during 10, I will want it right there. Oh crap, I don't want it there. You can go over here, you press remove, delete keyframe. Now it's just going to go back and forth again. So I'm going to just remove all these keyframes because they annoy me. So now that we're going about it, we got this. Alright, now we have over here. Now this is kind of our layout. This is a drop-down sheet of, what they call it? Outliner. So this is just like every single object in your scene. You have the render layers, which we'll get into later. We have the camera, the cube, and the lamp for now. And these toggle whether or not you see them in the view window or in the final render. These toggle whether or not they're rendered. Not sure what that does, to be honest. but I'll cover that later. I'll look into it for you guys. Again, I'm only a moderate at this program. I'm not amazing. I just know I know enough about it to make cool things. So these can actually be animated. So what I'm doing is I am just hovering over it and pressing I, and like the key I. And when it's yellow, that means that there's a keyframe. When it's green, that means there's no keyframe, but that's what it looks like right now. And so that's just changing the camera on and off. Now, we want to go into this tab. So this is a more extreme. This is a lot to talk about right here. We got a lot of things, as you can tell. I think I'm going to save a good chunk of it for later. Let's make this a little bigger for you guys. Big chunk of it for later. But basically, you have your rendering things where you can render it, you can animate it, or you can make an audio. Haven't really figured out audio yet. Then you have render presets where you change how wide it is, when the start frame ends, starts and ends, which also stretches these grayed out areas, these darker gray areas. That's how far you can tell it is that lighter gray is how long the video is, when it starts, when it ends. And then we have aspect ratio of the camera. If I press 0 on my numpad, it will automatically take me to the camera. So if I go like this, it'll change it. And aspect ratio is a little funky, but you can change it how you want. And then metadata, this just shows like all metadata is just like what you see on the file when you save a Blender file. It's just like, oh, it was saved at this time, and this is its name, blah, 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 blah. And then it's based off of a drop-down menu system, by the way, so if there's ever a little too much and you can't find something, just drop it all down, and you've got that. You can look through and then find your ways there. So output, this is really important. This is what you're going to be outputting as. You have your movies right here. I usually use AVI RAW because it's just the easiest to make straight a video, or I use, actually I don't use quite anything else unless I'm making a picture, in which I use these, which are images. So it all depends. This branches more into digital media classes and stuff, and how big you want your files to be, how small, how intricate, how detailed you want them to be. But that's a tutorial for another day. I don't really plan on doing that. I really want it to get into the meat and potatoes about how to work things. I mean, you guys know what some things are, but there's some basics you need to know before I get into that. So output. Then we have freestyle. This is a more of a drawing type thing. I believe it's used grease pencil. I don't touch it often. I don't use it. Sampling. Now, sampling is a little interesting because sampling shows how many times, I believe, how many times the computer looks at one square. So I'm going to press F12 here, and it's going to render. This is called rendering. It's going to work out every piece of paper, every little, niche, all the physics, all the light bounces, what we're seeing, what we're not seeing. This is the final render if I were to render it. And I just pressed F12 to toggle that. You want to get out of that, simply press escape. And now that has a sampling of like 128 samples. And that's calculating what's in the, it's calculating everything, all the physics, all the lighting, everything about that cube from this camera's angle. And this is why animations take so long, because it has to render each and every single frame. But it also has to render special effects and stuff when we get into layers, but again, that's later. So now for my favorite tool is the little render preview, which is 32 samples. So it doesn't look as cool, but it's Shift Z, and you just simply look around. You can see what it looks like from different angles. You can change its color and such, and just look around in the 3D space. And as you can tell, it's having trouble loading, but it's only 32 samples, so it's not the highest quality. Geometry, I haven't messed around with this. Light paths, these you can, you can tone down or tone up your render times depending on how many bounces they have and how much physics behind the light there is. And then motion blur, this just makes any motion blur just slightly, making it more realistic. Film is really cool. You can change a lot of things on film. You can change what you're looking at, how you're looking at, you see exposure. Now transparent. Transparent is cool. So here's what I'm going to show to examine transparent. I'm pressing 0, going back to camera, pressing F12. So right now, the world is a gray background. You can put pictures in your world, you can make the world any color you want. Most people put like certain pictures, make it look realistic. You know, you'll see that in games if you've ever seen, is like a giant picture just wrapped around the entire map so it looks like a legitimate background. That happens all the time. And make it more realistic, throw some clouds off in the distance or something if they like. But that's the world. It's gray. And if you put transparent on, then I'm going to render it again because nothing has changed between the renders. It has to re-render. You'll see there is actually no bright background. There is no world. This is very helpful when you're doing special effects and when you're stacking multiple layers, which you have to do for special effects and make anything look cool and realistic. So you'll see there is no background. That's a sign in all of Photoshop and all those other programs that there is no background. It only renders the objects in the scene. So I'm going to turn transparent off. Post-processing, compositing, this is like compression stuff. Sequencer's nice, you always want to do that, and compositing's nice. This is, I believe this has to do more with, right, okay, so compositing is a whole nother story, and we'll go to that later. I'm sure you guys are just itching to get into the meat and potatoes of this, but just hold on a bit. We'll get there. We'll get to the fun and cool stuff. So, you always want these on. Dither, what happens when you have a light bouncing multiple places, you get something called noise, which is where it gets really staticky and really pixelated. If you turn dither up, it'll do its best to kill that noise, to kill the pixelatedness of it, so it won't look so pixelated when you're doing it. Alright, layers. So, layers are a little more complex, and I think I'll do a separate video on layers. We'll come back to that. Objects, this is just the objects in the scene, and lighting, and this is just like all about your scene. Then we have the world. This is a world color. As you'll see, use nodes. I'll get into that later. And this is a world color gray we saw earlier. Ambient occlusion, that has to do with like lighting, and it's very helpful. It's hard to explain, but you generally want that on if you're going for realistic. And then we have ray visibility and settings. So now we have objects. So this is all the information about the objects, where it's located, where it's rotated, where it's scaled. Now you can go into objects. There's two ways to do this. As I said before, you can rotate something by going over to tools and say, hey, I want to rotate this. As you can see over here, my numbers went crazy. Here it goes again when I'm rotating it because it's saying where it exactly is. This is a scale 1 by 1 by 1, which this is one blender unit, whatever that means, and the location. So I'm just going to press 0, and boom, now it's 0, 0, 0. So you can go over here, and you can animate stuff, fine-tune it, and you can rotate it fine-tunely here if you want to. But there's a quicker way to do it. Instead of jumping back to object, you can simply press N, which, whatever it is selected, whether you have nothing selected or something selected, select this as your rotation here, location, and scale. And then I don't mess much with dimensions. Then grease pencil. Now this is a view. This is what your lens is. This is the lens of the camera that you're actually looking for. Viewpoint, not that camera. You want the viewport, and this is kind of your position of it. And then that's talking about movie clip more down there. Now 3D cursor. In every 3D thing I know of, there's always a sort of 3D cursor. You don't use this much except when you want to place objects or snap objects to a certain cursor. So for instance, if I have this selected, I click Shift S, which is a hotkey for snap. You can also go snap, and then snap cursor to center, snap selection to active, which is when you have two things selected and you want to snap them together. Snap cursor to active, or snap cursor to grid, or snap cursor to selected, or snap selection to grid, or snap selection to cursor, which does that. Also, Blender's cool. Control Z. You have that. You also have Control Z, C, and Control V. Now, I have two cubes, but I'm going to Control Z that and that. So, yes, you can copy and paste. But what most people do is they right-click, Shift D for duplicate, and kill. While we're on it, we saw that right here in duplicate. That's Shift D to duplicate whatever you have. So, while we're on it, if you just hit S, you can size. If you just hit R, you can rotate. Oops, got 2 cube. If you just hit X, you can delete. Just X and click. And we only have 1. So that's basically all I have for those little quick keys outside of editing. So let's get more into editing now. Now, I don't want to go around and just say, hey, this is how you do it. I kind of want to teach you along the way of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So modifiers, and this is a very beginning, I'm just kind of going over everything. So modifiers are actually really cool. You can do an array, which means you can make a pattern. You can do a bevel, which we've been over, that just makes one of the corners flat, and then Boolean and other fun things like this. Solidify, subdivision surface, this smooths everything out. Triangulate, that changes all your editing to triangles, which some people prefer. It's not always the best. You usually want to stick with squares, in my opinion. Wireframe it. You can wrap it around another object. You can do all sorts of cool things with modifiers. Now, this is kind of your, what do they call it? They call it object data, which helps for more advanced types of editing when you're trying to mess with particles and things. Now, this is the most important. This is your materials tab. Now, material is what you see. Everything spawns in with this default material. I keep saying spawning, but loads in with this default material. It's just this gray cube. You know, nothing much to look at. But if I do new, starts with the default material, which you can't tell the difference because lighting is a little weird. So let's drag you over here, push you over here. Again, Shift Z to go in and out of it. See, it's lighter to have it. Now, I want to select the cube again, which you can still select things. It doesn't highlight them, but inside this view, you can still select things you can see. So, if I can change the color here, it'll change it in the viewport in an example of the final. Get a drink real quick. Mouth's dry. Not my favorite water, but it'll do. In the final render. So you can change color, change brightness. This is what it'll look like. But there's so much more to materials than this. Now, this is texture. Now, textures are a little different. Because textures are like base. They're like stapling an image to it, but it's all flat. But if you do certain things in the compositor, which I've noticed lately, and I'll probably cover later on, then within the compositor, it is, you can actually make textures. And when I say texture, I mean like what you feel when you feel a sheetrock wall. You can actually create bumps. It's called bump maps and other things like that. Reflections of light, darkness, and brightness, and shadow and not. So I won't get into those much except through animation maybe, because I know some tricks to use them for the electricity in my in my intro that I'll probably put out sometime. Now, this is particles. So within a big difference between Cycles Render and Blender Render is that they handle materials differently and they handle particles differently. When I click particles, this will generate particles. Simple as that. And they're affected by all sorts of physics, generally by gravity. You can change how they're affected. They just generate particles. But if I press Shift Z, you won't see a thing because these are just examples of how the particles would work. The idea is you affect the particles how you want them to become, and then you, and it looks really cool, sorry, and then you apply what you want to those particles. So we have how many particles you have when they start, when they end. See, they'll stop generating around 200. And then you have how long they live, which is lifetime is how long they live before they fade out. You can see they're dying right here. If I turn my lifetime up, that will go further, so they eventually fade out, unless you want it for infinity, you can do that too. And then you have random. Now this applies a random factor to how long the particles live. And you can see where they emit from, where you have vertices, they emit from faces, or they emit from volume, and you have random, jittered, and this is how it kind of calculates which face is in which. You have cache, don't mess with that much, I don't. So you have emitter geometry. So normal gives the particles a starting velocity, which, as I see it, is it widens stuff, or it widens kind of the flow, so I'm going to let it calculate. See, it kind of widens the flow from the faces of the particles, or it really shrinks it. Let this recalculate, or it really shrinks it into that straight line you're looking for. So that's kind of how wide the spray is, I guess. Tangent, I've never really messed with. Rotation, never really messed with. Object, this is, I believe, yeah, this is just because it's from the object, like it applies a force from the face it came from. So I'm just going to put that back to 0. And all of this, every single setting in any one of these things, almost every single setting, can be animated just by pressing I over them. You just got to remember, oh, also, Alt-I, you'll want to know, because when I press I over this, oh, what do you know, it does do it. But it's a pain to go all the way back and do remove keyframe. You can just, as you can see, Alt-I. So you hover over this, Alt-I. Boom, it's dead. Then this is emitter object. This is which directions they emit from the object. We have X, Y, Z. Well, yeah, X, Y, and then Z. And which direction they emit, which is very helpful. Then physics. So we have the Newtonian, we have fluid physics, Boyd's fluids, keyed, or none. So these are kind of like base physics sets. Don't mess with them much. You could, especially if you're going for fluid. That's later on. Now this is rendering. So we don't see anything. But if I select parent, I should... Oh, my bad. Never mind. Whoops. Because we're still in halo effect. Now if we go to object, and this can be any object, doesn't have to be your base cube. You just select cube, and emitter, parents, material. What's wrong here? Lifetime's up. Start at 1. Are my sizes just off? Hold on a second. Let's turn up the size. That's very strange. That is very, very strange. Do I have my velocity off or something? So basically what's supposed to happen is you can change what objects. Most people just do spheres for sparkles and stuff, but if you want this to be like raining cubes, you'd take this and select the cube. I'll have to show you later. I don't know why it's doing it. So that's what it looks like. And then you can make them lines, you can make them paths, they leave paths, group. Don't know what billboard is, I haven't touched that yet. Then we have display, this is how much you're looking at. This has nothing to do with render, it's just what we see in the viewpoint here. Then we have children, which is a better way of calculating if you want a ton, an absolute boatload of particles. This is how you go about it. You have them have children, which kind of make them create more particles on their way instead of calculating all of them at the same time. Field weights. Okay, this is obvious. Gravity. This is like how much physics that's already applied to them. You can change gravity on and off, or negative if you'd wish to. off, and remember, all of this is animation based, on and off, and then you can do all sorts of fun things with this. That's my favorite one. Now, physics we'll get into later, maybe next episode. I don't know, depends on how you guys receive this episode, if you like it, if you don't like it. And also, first time ever doing a tutorial, so critiques are welcome. Speaking of critiques, no one's watching, but that's cool because I don't plan for them to be watching. So that's kind of the base of what I do. We have, that's kind of the base of Blender. So we have like rigid body. This is more physics stuff, doing with gravity, force fields affect particles and other things that are anything else in this tab. So you have quick water and smoke and fire and fun things like that. So we'll get to that. But anyway, I think I will call this a wrap up. I went pretty quick, but we'll get into making some cool things later. So I will catch you guys later, and keep dreaming out there.